Theodore Roosevelt, born on October 27, 1858, was the 26th President of the United States. He was born into a very wealthy family. As a child, Roosevelt was unhealthy. He suffered with asthma and normally spent his days inside studying history. Later in life, he began spending his days outdoors. He invested in 2 ranches and spent quite a bit of time out west. There he lived riding horses, driving cattle, and hunting quite often. Years later, in 1901, Theodore became president. At age 42, he was the youngest man to ever become president of the United States. At the time, Americans were concerned for the future of the nation's natural places, and the awareness of the nature's bad state was spreading. Roosevelt wanted to put aside and preserve some of our country's beautiful land for public use and recreation. He knew he had to do it soon before it was too late for nature. For Native Americans, most of the culture was based on the natural environment. To them, the elements were very powerful. Nature taught the Native Americans to work together, surviving off of the land. When the United States started taking over land, many treaties were made between the Native Americans and the United States government. In total, there are 383 of these ratified treaties. Most of these treaties have been broken by the United States. To the Native Americans already living out west, it was their home. To the new people, it was just another part of the United States. The industrial growth of the United States caused for natural resources to be used up quickly. These resources include wood, coal, and natural minerals. The Americans used the West as a place with unlimited resources. The buffalo out west were predicted to soon become extinct. The land was being ruined ever since the American expansion that occurred. Buffalo were a very large part of life and culture for tribes. The Native Americans relied deeply on buffalo. They figured out 50 different ways to use the buffalo for supplies, hunting, and food. Roosevelt realized he needed to preserve the land before it was too late for the buffalo. The Antiquities Act was created in 1906. This was an authorization that allowed presidents to be able to stop the destruction of the national landscape. Archaeologists realized that historical sites were being ruined along with the historic artifacts. They realized this in the late 1800s. By creating the Antiquities Act, Roosevelt was preventing this from continuing to happen. Thanks to the Antiquities Act, the President can now make any federal land a national monument. The first national monument was Devil's Tower in Wyoming. The Grand Canyon was going to be destroyed until Roosevelt came in and said no. These kinds of spots are what needed to be saved for future generations to come. Roosevelt had preserved more than 230 million acres of land by the time his presidential term was over. Theodore Roosevelt is known well for conserving and managing land. He created the idea of doing this, and he led to the establishment of preserving land and forests. He knew that he needed to preserve the land not only for the people, but for the future generations to come. Overall, Roosevelt's decision to create national parks was a great one. It was very bold. The Native Americans could no longer live in these national parks, and it was very hard for Roosevelt to make this decision. Although they couldn't live in their homes, Roosevelt preserved the land for everyone to come and see the beauty of nature. Roosevelt knew that for years to come, this land would be protected and safe. His decision to make national parks has made our country a place of beauty and a country to be proud of. Roosevelt was honored in national monuments such as Yellowstone, Mount Rushmore, and Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Roosevelt helped our country discover the true beauty of our country's land, and he will forever be remembered for his great accomplishment.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.